sitting on the other side of the table here. When I was part of Waterloo's UWX, that was 2.5 years ago. It was really exciting, like seeing how other people presented, and hope I do this justice. But yeah, good to see you, Jeremy, as well. It's been a while, but without further ado, I'm gonna kick this off. So welcome to my talk on leveling up your design process with prototyping. So prototyping is actually my personal favorite part of the process out of the entire design pipeline. Just like a really short background on myself. When I went to Waterloo, I actually started off as a chemical engineer. And that career didn't quite pan out for me because it was a mix of two things. One is in terms of from an interest standpoint, it didn't quite align with my personality. Generally, I'm a very social person. I'm a very cooperative person. And design has that aspect of collaboration that you don't really get out of solitary engineering work. So during my second year, I decided to make the decision to make a full transition into design. And the latter half of my university career consisted of exclusively design internships. So I worked at Roadmunk, Yukon, and Noom as an in-house designer, and Usability. They're called Intersect today. They've since rebranded since 2017, but that was a design agency. So post-graduation, I actually felt not competent enough to jump into the workforce right away. So instead, I took a year to do a master's program at University of Washington in Seattle. So yeah, people, when I asked my profs to write my recommendation letters, they were really confused. They're like, why are you going from UW to UW? And then I had to explain that it's actually University of Washington, not Waterloo. But anyway, some people think I'm a traitor, but I'm back here again, so who's laughing now? But anyway, so after graduation, a few months after graduating, I managed to land my position at Roadmunk today. So it's really interesting because Roadmunk was the company where I did my very first internship ever in design. And 5 years later, the company has exploded from 6 employees to we're about 130 people today. And so yeah, it was really interesting to come full circle and give back to the company that got everything started for me to begin with. So yeah, in terms of the agenda of what we have today, these are the four main core topics as Kristen has introduced. What is prototyping, why you should do it, when you should be doing it, and how to actually do it in the field as a practitioner. So so jumping right in, like what exactly is prototyping? The mental exercise I asked you guys to do in the, there was a mental exercise that was at the first slide. I'm just gonna do a quick check to see if people have posted anything here. Hold on, wait, sorry. But yeah, so I'm gonna just count down quickly here for 60 seconds starting now, and feel free to post your own definition to the chat whenever you're ready. Don't feel pressure to share. Cool. So time's up. Just gonna, so thanks for being brave and posting your own definitions. I'm just gonna jump right in. So Carol mentioned prototyping is an early version or simulation of a design flow / product that allows designers to test the usability of their designs with potential users before launch. So that's a really great definition as a working basis already. I like how you mentioned potential users. That's definitely one of the key components to highlighting what the value of prototyping is. So showing interactions. Absolutely, prototypes can be used to show a variety of things, and interactions are one of the biggest parts of the prototyping process. We're done something used to illustrate a concept. Yeah, prototyping is definitely used as a way to demonstrate proof of concept, convey your ideas in an interactive manner, can vary in levels to help gather insight and feedback. Yep, absolutely. So I'm gonna just jump right in to a quote that I really like from. So IDEO, for a little bit of background context, they are a design agency that was one of the companies that popularized the design thinking principle and interaction design as we know it today. Much of what UX does today can be accredited to IDEO's philosophy. So one of their biggest components of philosophy is if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. In addition to that, one of their core philosophy is this thing called a bias to action. So previously, most designers, what they did when they're creating designs, they would spend weeks, if not months, planning a giant product spec document, and then that product spec document will be dropped upon the table of a designer and say, okay, you guys just design something and build it out, and we're never going to speak again. That was 50-50 in terms of whether or not, like, there was a lot more variance there in terms of what they actually were able to accomplish, whether the product would be a failure or success. But what IDEO really did in terms of bias to action, they said, you know what, instead of spending forever planning, we're just going to build. We're going to build things, test it out, and see how that works, and iterate from there. So just jumping right ahead, we're going to play a little game here. We're going to guess. I'm going to show you pictures of what the prototype is, and you're going to guess what the end product is. We can just go through this quickly. So feel free to post it in the chat or just unmute yourself here. Well, okay.
Everyone will have to use the chat, I think, in this case.
Okay. Yeah, so this one is actually one of the earliest prototypes for the Nintendo Switch. It's pretty interesting how I think they just used duct tape to tape two Wiimotes around the back and wired it up such that the nunchuck controller is on the front. And this one might be a bit obscure. Any ideas? So this one is actually, yeah, that's exactly right. That's the first prototype for a Google Glass. They have they taped basically a plexiglass display onto a bicycle helmet to help simulate and project things onto the plexiglass screen. This one. This is the very first prototype for, you guessed it, the mouse. And so here's a pretty interesting video. This was one of my professors. Oh my, but let me just try playing it again. Let me know if you're able to hear the sound of him. Is sound not coming through? So this was one of the so Sesame Street actually commissioned IDEO to work on their Monster Maker app, and the idea was whenever the player would tap on the screen, the monster would do a different dance move, and they prototyped this in a really clever way and super low budget by just using cardboard and someone standing behind, right? And then like one person will pretend like they're tapping on the person's nose, and the person will do a different dance move. So I thought that was a really cool example of how you can basically get really, really creative in terms of the types of prototypes that you want to create. In terms of the common themes that all of these things have, there are a couple. One is a bias towards action. So instead of spending forever planning out something and then only building out the final product, the designers in these examples, they just jump right in. One of the other ones is the focus on speed. Here, the focus is definitely not on the fidelity. As you could see, the things were, it looked drastically different from what the end product is. And here, the visual design is not the most relevant aspect of what they're trying to test. The focus was more on speed and functionality. And lastly, some of you guys mentioned it is a way to communicate and demonstrate proof of concepts. It can be used to communicate ideas with different stakeholders, depending on who is involved. So in terms of now that you understand what a prototype is at a higher level, so the question is, why should you prototype? What value does this bring to you as a designer? So firstly, as user-centered designers, we definitely design for our users and not ourselves. And this is something that you have to remember. Your own personal taste and biases should not be used to influence the way that you create designs. Prototyping allows you to field test these designs with real users and uncover a lot of the incorrect assumptions that you may potentially have. Secondly, the prototyping process makes design semi-scientific. The way I like to jump into these sessions is always to have a very concrete list of hypotheses or assumptions about what I'm currently testing. It's like, for example, my assumption is that the users will be able to get through this flow perfectly fine under 10 seconds. That is my null hypothesis. And then I will be able to test it using using the objectivity introduced through prototyping to generate evidence as to whether or not that holds true or not. So thirdly, like I mentioned in 2 previous slides, so everybody has blind spots and biases and incorrect assumptions, especially depending on what your background experience was. So one of the fun things about UX is as you kind of get into the field, you'll notice a lot of people have different educational backgrounds before they jumped into UX. A lot of you folks here are quite, I suppose, lucky in that I think a lot of people here are from the systems design program, which is a really, really good pipeline for entering UX specifically. But for example, my background was in Chem Eng. When I was in grad school, I had people with political science background, CS. There were a couple that were middle school teachers, actually. So it's interesting, like since everyone has a different perspective, testing your assumptions helps eliminate some of your own personal biases and exposes you to blind spots that you otherwise wouldn't have uncovered. And one of the other things that allows you to learn and fail, allows you to fail quickly and also learn quicker from these iterations. So on the right-hand side is an image of all the PlayStation 1 prototypes that they ever made to test out the different form factors. You were wondering as to, so like, in that sense, the Wiimote with the nunchucks, that wasn't the most unique design because strictly speaking, the PlayStation designers already tested that one ahead of time. So, and lastly, as I mentioned before, so this 3-circle thing is also part of the design thinking process, is the idea that when you're designing products, you need to combine the business value, so dollars and dimes, with the feasibility, so architecture and technical constraints, and the desirability for user needs. Because if you only focus on the viability, the business viability, and neglect the other two, you end up with either design debt or tech debt. But the thing is, especially when you're working with product managers, when they only articulate their vision at a higher level, sometimes it's really difficult to actually get everyone aligned as to what that vision looks like until something visual is put in front of them. So having a tool, having a prototype to demonstrate and communicate that helps drive alignment, which is incredibly important in the workplace. So jumping to the next session. So when exactly should you be prototyping? So this is the design thinking double diamond model. It's really, really popular today. Like a lot of, like if you basically attend any workshops, this is the type of thing that they would teach you. Um, my point of view on this one though is a bit interesting. So as when I worked, when you're in an agency, the entire flow is more relevant in that you want to start with empathizing through user research. You want to define what your problem is, write out the problem definition, create some ideations, prototype and test, et cetera, et cetera. But from my experience working as an in-house designer, though, most of the time, the product users generally already have really good ideas as to what they want out of your app, and it's strictly speaking is the product manager's role to find what the right problem is. So most of the time that I've been doing design, at least in my workplace, is I'll do a little bit of discovery, but the majority of my time is spent on finding the right solution, actually. So doing the ideation, prototyping, and testing cycle. So what I'm trying to say here is the agency model versus the in-house model will be different, and which aspects of the diamond you'll be focused on would also be different, depending on your role and the structure of your organization as well. So jumping right ahead, in terms of the process that I found to be working really well at Roadmunk are broken into 3 phases. Defining the right problem, which is typically done by the PMs, finding the right solution, and making sure that the solution is actually done right. So, but in terms of where prototyping really comes in and really shines for me personally, has been the latter 2 stages here. The first place where you can use where you can build a prototype is a concept validation prototype during phase 2, which is finding the right solution. So the questions you want to ask is, you want to keep the fidelity of this one low, and the questions you want to ask is, are people actually going to use this? Like, if you're just going to build something and then say, hey, I think the better question to ask is like, if you were to have this today, if I were to introduce this to you today, do you need a manual to actually learn it? Or can this just be gracefully integrated into your workflow with as little friction as possible? So it's basically like, how much value does this actually bring to users? And if this solution that you're presenting here actually addresses a need. So I'm gonna show you guys a demo of what I used to create as a low fidelity prototype from work here. So giving a bit of a background context, Roadmunk is a company that creates a product management software suite. And traditionally, what most product managers do is they do the majority of their prioritization and work on Excel. But what we're trying to address is helping users import their spreadsheet data into our framework so they can use some of the preset frameworks without building stuff out on their own and having to fill out these values. So in here, specifically, we wanted to keep the fidelity of the prototype as low as possible. As you can see, like the background here may seem quite high fidelity. That's because that's the app of what we already have today. But the new functionality, I promise you will be really terrible in terms of visual design here. So the main focus here is the functionality and not the layout or the visual designs. We just want to make sure that, like, for example, like they are able to get through this flow fine. Like I literally put a giant gray blob here saying this is a placeholder image to drive home the point that like we're focused on just the flow. The spinner that's supposed to come up is going to show them a CTA. They'll be able to try again. They'll upload something. There's a notification that comes up. And then there's a little bit of piece of feedback showing you that something has been imported. So here the focus is on the functionality. The second place where prototypes could come in would be during the usability testing phase, when you figured out which solution, which direction that you really want to go in, but you are still unsure as to the efficiency of the workflow. So you're doing things such as like, you're doing the finer tweaks now to make sure that not the flow it would be efficient, but the actual interactions, the micro interactions, are efficient and accurate. So an example of that, so exact same thing, but I created one for the high fidelity prototype as well, just to show you some select screens. So here the visual design is enhanced here to introduce elements from our design system. The user will be able to proceed to upload here. The placeholder images have been replaced with what the devs would actually end up building out. Browsing for CSV, they'll be able to see the errors, and they will be able to try again if there is a specific error message. So because of the timeline of our product here, we didn't have enough time to do both a high fidelity and a final fidelity one. So the two of them were kind of merged together. Because we have a design system, we're able to put this together reasonably quickly. But the key point that I want to drive home here is that you want to basically test out, like the workflow did not change from the low fidelity one, but the visual design and the layout of components on the page really did. But this is the point where you would be thinking about that and not at the previous stage. You don't want to conflate the two when you're doing testing, if possible. So you kind of saw a demo. You're saying, great, Javan, like you showed me some examples from work, but how do I do it myself, right? So typically when I get started on this right away is I typically like to start on pen and paper. That's the best way to brainstorm and ideate quickly without being married to any of your ideas in particular. In the past, when I did the more like experimental sort of projects, what I like to do as well is to do storyboarding prototypes, where if the specific focus is just on the experience, you don't want to focus so much on the nitty gritty of the elements. What you want to do is just like the day in the life of, so in the sense of product manager, right? It will be like in the storyboard, it will show like they're going to work, they're doing something, and then they get frustrated looking at their spreadsheet. Instead, they'll boot up Roadmunk. They'll do something magical in Roadmunk, and they'll leave the office with a smile. That's the idea of a storyboarding, where you're focusing on the overall experience and their journey, and less so on the nitty gritty of the screen elements. But in terms of moving to higher fidelity or lower fidelity, I personally really enjoy Figma. But I know this isn't the tool for everybody, so I would like to suggest an alternative. A lot of the less technically oriented people in my company, so our PM, and we have a really hands-on CEO as well, they really like using this software called Whimsical. It's really, really good for building both flowcharts. Flowcharts and wireframes are both capable, and it does have the same sharing functionality as some of the other ones. So this is a viable alternative for sure, but I personally don't use it, so I can't really speak to the viability of this one. And I want to talk specifically a bit about like high fidelity prototyping tools such as After Effects. The thing I found is that in the vast majority of cases, After Effects is a bit overkill in terms of what you want to do in the workplace, especially if timelines are tight. You don't have a lot of time. Like After Effects is you can get 95% of the things that you want to do out of Figma or a similar tool like Envision. After Effects, if you really want to go advanced, you can for prototyping 1 to 2 animations, but I haven't found a need for it in the workplace though thus far. So in terms of the things that you'll actually need, so prior to these 3 steps, you want to go through the recruitment process, but that touches more on the user research side of things. So I'm not going to cover that for today. But when you're going to these prototyping testing sessions, you want to make sure that your prototype is user-proofed. You want to make sure that you have a properly stated and reviewed study guide that clearly has your goals, scenarios, and assumptions. And you also want to bring a willing or unwilling note taker to help you take notes, because this both helps eliminate biases and also lightens your load, so you can focus on the facilitation and the driving of the actual sessions itself instead of the note-taking aspect. So there's one thing that I really want to emphasize here, which is the user-facing prototypes should be for the happy path. Here, you're not testing for the edge cases unless it's something that is really, really expected. If it's not something that they will commonly encounter, you shouldn't need to. So in terms of what you want in the study guide, you want to have 4 main things. One is you want to have an intro section just to build some initial rapport, as well as ask for affirmative consent that like, so for example, at my company, we always like to record our sessions for prototype, so the rest of the team can also learn from the insights that you generate. Secondly, we'll make sure to have some pre-interview questions to help understand the user behavior and guide them and help set the correct expectations. Then we'll ask the user to role play and carry out scenario. And here we'll basically evaluate behind the scene as to how well they achieve the tasks that we have set out for them to do. And lastly, we'll have some post-session questions. Some of the things I really enjoy asking is, how was this experience or functionality different from what you expected? Were there any features or functionalities that were missing? Were there any features or functionalities that were out of place? And how would this prototype or experience fit into your workflow today? So those are viable questions to ask here for sure. And here I go. I just spoiled my own slide. But yeah, so these are some of the example questions you can definitely ask to help address the specific points if the user doesn't bring them up themselves. So for example, like how accurate is the prototype? Did I make any mistakes during the construction? Was there anything confusing? And what value does this bring to the prototype? If I was to build, so one of the things as an in-house designer, you're constantly being asked, what is a product market fit and how willing are users going to pay for this thing? So like, for example, how much value does this actually bring? So, so here is an example of a facilitation that I typically do. Because of we're living in a post-COVID era, like the vast majority of sessions I do today, even the moderated ones are done using a mixture of Zoom and Figma. So here's an example of the exact same flow that I showed you guys earlier, but with a live participant. In some scenarios, like there was another project that I worked on previously, which again, timeline constraints. So instead of moderated exercises, which you have to go through the entire recruitment facilitation process, we use this thing called Maze, which helps with unmoderated usability sessions. So what this thing does is, here's an example of it. You'll be able to upload a Figma prototype or a Sketch prototype link into Maze. You have these preset scenarios and tasks that the user will be able to go through. And the system in the background will be able to evaluate things such as misclick rate, average duration, average success, bounce rate, et cetera, and using their algorithm, they will be able to generate a score as well as provide you recommendations on what you can and cannot fix, what you should and should not fix. So in terms of the tool sets that I use between Figma, Maze, and Dovetail, so this basically solves the vast majority of my needs in terms of gathering insights and synthesizing insights for these usability testing sessions. So I'll just show you guys a quick example of what it looks like. Some of the projects that I have live today. So on Dovetail here, here's one of the projects that I did really recently, custom scoring. So once you finish the interview sessions, you'll be able to transcribe all of the interview using Dovetail. And depending on what the users say, you'll be able to tag the things that they say. So for example, right, this user side identifying potential risks and issues. After you go through the transcription process, you'll be able to tag all of the things that they said and gather them up. And so this tool is really cool because it allows you to highlight insights and show you, so for example, like this pie chart on what the most common insights are. So here you can see like existing workflow involving spreadsheets. That's the most common thing that users have said. There are some minor issues with the scrolling, so I don't know what's really going on here, but based on the tooltip here, yeah, so users want to pull in the things they want to, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a really good way to gather insights in one place and allows your entire team. So in my case is myself, our director of design, the PM who works with me, and another designer who used to be on this project as well. We'll be able to see all the insights that I have gathered here, and they will be able to dissect that down and use this to create a roadmap as to what we want to address next. So in terms of what I have on Maze here, so here's another example of our sign-up flow. Right now, this one is live. So on the left-hand side, for example, you can give users context. You'll be able to see a lot of the responses that they have. What are you hoping that this will help you accomplish, et cetera, et cetera. And this one will give you insights into what the success rate here. So here, for example, since the direct success rate is 0, there's either an issue with how this prototype was set up, where the workflow just doesn't make sense to people. But this is a good way for you to provide insights without actually going through the steps to do the sessions. Yep. So that brings us to close to the end. I have a take-home exercise for you guys. That's pretty fun. Let me just pull this up. Okay. So here is a deceptively simple prototype that I made of a hover tooltip here. So I'll just show you what it does. So if you hover onto here, it will show the hover state for this little checkbox. Clicking into it, it will change into the hovered and clickable state. And if you hover off of it, the hover will basically disappear. So basically, this is what the checkbox will look like minus the transition animation for how this would appear on a live site. Try and build this out yourself and see how long it would take you to figure it out, I suppose. So yeah, that is your take-home exercise. It's a bit of a brain teaser, it's a bit of a puzzle. I'll show you guys a really quick hint here. So I used a total of 4 frames, and in terms of how the prototype is set up, you will want to use the while hovering tooltip. But otherwise, try and figure out how you can set something like this up yourself. Cool. All right, so yeah, that's it for the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have at this point.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Javan. That was super insightful. I can't believe how much I actually learned from that. Prototyping has definitely been a big thing, I think, where I work, especially since everything's remote now too. So like prototyping and testing, there's so many differences now. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat and then we'll get those answered for you. All right, while we wait for some, I actually do have one that I can ask. Before, some people have like talked about the looks of prototypes, but if a prototype can demonstrate the functionality of the idea, is it important for it to look basically exactly the same way it is presented, the final idea, I guess?
Given my experience with product works, typically they want to drive things fast. And if you can cut corners, well, in an ideal world, I would say if you had as much time as you want, you didn't mind the workload, yeah, you want to keep it as close to the final idea as possible. But the iteration process is totally okay to make it different from what the final idea would look like. Does that answer the question?
Yep.
Cool.
Awesome. We have a question from Joe here.
Cool.
Unrelated, but what made you decide to go to grad school and why UW 2.0? And would you say that it was worth it given that you already had design experience?
Great question. Okay. What made me decide to go to grad school? So, I was not confident in my design skills at the time when I finished all my internships, because I was very much a copycat, so to speak, when I was an intern designer. After all my internship finished, when I looked at some of the portfolios of people that got like sick jobs. So for example, right, like I overlapped for a year with people like beasts like Jenny, Megan, like Melody, like the UWUX alums. Their portfolios were freaking amazing. The projects were freaking amazing. I just didn't think I was quite at their level yet. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to own my skills and push myself further. And another point is with grad school, it's not just immediately useful for getting a job post-graduation. It's also really viable for future-proofing your career in the sense that like there are a lot of things that I definitely wouldn't have learned from just working. Okay, so basically what grad school does is it helps you push beyond just the how and the what. It helps you ask the why behind. But once you understand all three, the how, the why, and the what, it gives you a much stronger foundation to push back on certain parts of the process. Because what it teaches you is a more complete tool set. It gives you a bigger picture of the elephant instead of just like, for example, half of it. Because the other thing is with the designerships I had, unfortunately, like like prototyping in a design facing org is much more common today. It's much more valued. But when I was going through advocating for prototyping, that was a battle. Like it was hard to demonstrate to the battle, like why do designers need to take 2 extra weeks to test with things? Why can't we just launch it already, so to speak? Like it was different back then, and I wanted more prototyping experience. I wanted more user research experience. That's one of the biggest reasons why I went into it. So for me, it was only a 1-year program. I would say definitely worth it. Like grad school helps teach you how to think about problems in a way that you wouldn't have previously. And from my personal experience, it was definitely worth it. Why UW 2.0 specifically? I thought Seattle would be a great fit for me. I really want to work for some of the companies there. So for example, NVIDIA has a HQ there. Microsoft has a huge quarter there. Amazon's home base is there. Like Facebook, like basically all the big tech companies have a home base there, and the Seattle's cost of living to earnings ratio is fantastic compared to SF, for example. That was my main reason for wanting to go there. And long story short, I found that although I enjoyed some aspects of the city in terms of a cultural fit, Toronto is still a much better fit for me. And plus my partner is based out of Toronto. That's why I made the decision to come back. So yeah, hope that was helpful. It was a pretty long rant.
UW 2.0.
Yeah. Just give me a question in the Q&A, but not able to open it currently.
I can pull it up.
Sure.
All right. This one is, how have you done usability tests from home? Any programs, softwares you would recommend to do usability testing?
Okay. So I'll show you the sort of the whole flow of what I did, right? Sure. Happy to demonstrate. So here's one of the projects that I'm currently working on. Like we first start with a study guide. For us, is fairly minimal. Like I mentioned before, you have an intro section, pre-interview section, design exercise section, and then the post-session interview section. In addition to that, I have the product manager or whoever is facilitating will fill out this observer template in the background. So as I'm asking these questions to the users, they would answer these things here. Those are 2 pieces of the puzzle. The third piece, which is the most difficult part from my experience, is actually the recruitment process. So we have a user study form that we have created that lives perpetually in the app. Interested users will be able to fill this out, and they'll say like, okay, what's the size of your team? What tools you use today? What's your current role, et cetera, et cetera. If they fill this out, we'll reach out to them and schedule a time using this tool called Calendly.com. I'll basically send them a link to my calendar. They'll book a time slot. I will shoot my PM an email, and we'll basically run through the guide. And in terms of how I'm actually facilitating it, between Figma, Zoom's screen share, and Maze for the unfacilitated sessions, that's typically enough for gathering those insights. And after those insights are done, like I mentioned earlier, I literally, like, these are all the sessions I've done in the past like few months. I'll just pop them in here, and then the transcription will handle the rest. So that's typically the full flow. And after this point, my design manager specifically, she's really good at providing autonomy, so I'm pretty grateful for it. But generally, she would trust me to take the insights I gather and help inform the next iteration of the design. So I'll show you an example of one of the things I'm working on currently, right? Like, it's pretty crazy today. So I like, in terms of how I actually do the design and like how I come up with these ideas, I do a ton of competitive analysis just to see existing patterns of what's out there already, like existing for the different views. Like this is iteration 1, which is already in low fidelity. And then I went through iteration 2, met with a bunch of people. Iteration 3, met with a few users. Iteration 4, iteration 5, and right now I'm on the latest iteration, which is iteration 6. So like that's sort of the process that I have to go through. The reason why I have so much time on this one, despite me complaining about timeline earlier, is because our eng team is working to reduce some of the tech debt that they have in the background. So design and product have more time to do these iterations. But yeah, that's typically the whole process between Figma and Zoom and Maze and Dovetail. Like those are sort of my big 4 for getting things out of the way.
Awesome. Hope that answered that question. I guess while waiting for someone else to type a question down, you mentioned oh, we actually have one. Never mind. Awesome. From Jeremy, what were your main considerations when choosing internships and full-time?
It's a great question, actually. So yeah, funnily enough, you mentioned that. It's I had the opportunity to, okay, so so let me frame this by saying, like, I actually went, like, that was a really difficult decision that I had to make when I went to UW in Seattle. So Seattle has really, really good outlook and career growth as someone who works in tech. The pay there, starting pay there, was also really freaking amazing. And the reason why I turned it down was because the city itself wasn't a great fit for me. American culture, I just couldn't get used to it, as unfortunate as it is. I found like Canadian culture to be a better fit. Plus, my friends, my family, as well as my partner are based out of here. So what I found when it came to prioritizing was the relationships, and that definitely holds true for the full-time work that I do today. Like, for full disclosure, the work I do isn't the most glamorous from a like impact level, right? Like our user base is only roughly like 80,000 people compared to some of the like millions of users, like hundreds of millions of users apps that you could otherwise have. Like some of my, like a bunch of my classmates from grad school, they ended up at like Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and like TikTok. So like those are the big 4, right? In terms of impact, it's not the biggest, but what I enjoy a lot from my company is I really, really enjoy working with my manager, and I really enjoy my immediate teammates. The team that I work on, like those are the people that they help me. Like I want to get up in the morning and see their faces every morning. Like I want to hear what they're doing each given day during stand up. Like I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but like relationships motivate me. And when I was going through the interviewing process, I really got along with I really had great chemistry with my manager, who was the one who interviewed me. And that's sort of the reason why I chose the company today. Like, because the thing I found is that there's talent everywhere you go. There's good mentorship everywhere you go, as long as you're willing to push yourself and look for it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what you prioritize in life, right? Because I know a lot of the UW UX alums from before, they chose to go to the States, and that's perfectly fine, right? That's if that's what's the most valuable, most important to you, that's great. But like for me personally, it was relationships and the ones that I already had. So, but yeah, I hope that answers your question, Jeremy.
Another one we do have. Do you have any advice for new grads?
Mm-hmm. Start looking for work early. Don't do what I did. So I really loafed it and didn't start working on my portfolio resume until like basically a week after graduating. And for me, I really had to scramble while looking for work. And like, luckily enough, I knew like since I interned at Roadmunk before, I kind of just leveraged my network to find work. But definitely reach out to your network. Like, it's much easier to get informational interviews, but when you're not actually looking for work, get started on the job search process and do these information interviews and make those connections before you graduate, if you can. Other advice for new grads, don't stress out too much. Honestly, like like right now, I would say if you're having trouble looking for work, like I'm not saying you are, but if you are, I would say is 80% external circumstances, and 20% internal circumstances. Because like just because of COVID, like most places have hiring freezes where their budgets are super low, and like for our company, right? Like full disclosure, our subscription numbers went down just because people aren't willing to try new software anymore. They just don't have the budget for it. So similar things may apply for internships or new grads. Juniors are somewhat expensive to take on depending on what level they are. So now may be a good time to just find time to either improve your existing skills or even apply for grad school. Honestly, like since the job market isn't going to recover for a year or two at least, like it may be a good idea to look for grad programs just to level up your skill from an academic standpoint. Testing things for information architecture. Users aren't typically great at giving feedback for information architecture. The best way I've found for testing that is actually through a card sorting exercise. For those of you guys who may not be familiar, I'm just gonna, whoops, I keep on doing this. Sorry, give me a second. Okay. So, my LinkedIn is just Javan Wang, by the way. So here's this exercise called card sorting. Essentially, you just make a deck of cards with words.
In Ethiopia, pictures and the city to buy.
Okay, this is not a very good example, but like basically you have you write a bunch of words on a card and you say just organize it, and then you give them a stack of sticky and say organize it based on what you think makes sense, and then write a sticky note for the category. Like that's the best way for testing information architecture, generally speaking, more than anything else. So the good thing is, Maze, actually, you are able to do card sorting exercises here, if I remember correctly. Block type, multiple choice, opinion scale, yes, no, context. Yeah, so on Maze, actually, they have a card sorting functionality. I've never used it myself, but you're able to do this using the software. So, cool.
Awesome. All right. In that case, if there are no more questions, we'll give it like maybe 10 seconds just to see. All right. In that case, thanks so much, Javan. Really appreciate it. Oh, someone asked something. Where will there be a recording? We will send a recording either through the UWX Slack, so definitely be sure to join that. And we can see if we can link it to the Facebook event, but we will let you guys know definitely once it comes out and how we'll be sharing it. Awesome. Thanks so much, Javan. Really appreciate taking the time to come out and join us tonight. Huge round of applause for Javan. It was amazing.
The pleasure is all mine.
Awesome. And we will close it off there. Thanks so much, guys.
So yeah, don't be a stranger. If you have any questions or you want to connect on LinkedIn, always keep an open line. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Yeah, that was fun.
All right.